this way I see there is still a light in me. Carry onward thankfully, and let the light see what it sees.
So in projective geometry, there's this projective duality, which is if you have points, so say you have 2 points and you connect these points by a line, then you can make various statements in this language of, I have points, I'm connecting them by lines, I have 2 lines, I intersect them and I get a point. These lines share a point, these lines don't share a point, so we have this language of talking about points and lines and intersecting lines to get a point or joining points to get lines. And then we also have planes, and we have this language of 2 planes can intersect, and the intersection of 2 planes is a line. Or that if you have 2 lines that touch, then there's a plane containing these 2 lines. And so a projective duality is that you can take all this language and every true statement that you can make in this language, and you can turn it inside out, so that, or around, or upside down, or I like inside out, but where you switch all the statements so that points everywhere get replaced with planes, planes everywhere get replaced with points, and lines remain lines, but the statement that 2 points are connected by a line becomes the statement that 2 planes intersect in a line, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so this fundamental principle of projective geometry has this incredible beauty when you really contemplate it a bit, and drawing figures with it, and really it enlivens it and becomes very rich. But the place that has really struck me as profound and fruitful for meditation is the finite point switching with the infinite plane and vice versa. So, So one important thing about projective geometry, of course, is that fundamentally for projective geometry to have this symmetry, for it to be possible to switch around the language in this way, for that to be possible, there has to be infinite elements. There has to be a plane at infinity where all parallel lines intersect. And so what has struck me as very profound for meditation is that you can, when you switch this around, you have the notion of a point at infinity, and then the infinite periphery takes the place of a point. And then, of course, after this just came up in a conversation with, last fall when I came here, this came up in a conversation with Oliver, just kind of in the mathematical context. He mentioned the point at infinity, and so then this kind of struck me as being really important meditatively. Of course, I later picked up a book by George Adams where he takes this up to some extent, and he proposes this as being connected to the processes of life. But what really struck me, and this is of interest to you as a person who's really focused on the meditation aspect of things, is just the sensation of that. I think a sensation that comes up in several meditations, and very specifically the third basic exercise, where you hold this firm center and centeredness that has this certain firmness to it in the center, a center that's unmoved and firm, that if you dualize this and you come to this experience of an infinite peripheral plane that surrounds and encompasses everything,
that's right,
which is firm, then the movement, the waves in the third basic exercise, the wave crashing against the lighthouse, you can experience a total chaos around you and yet have this infinite periphery that is firm and allows you to experience the chaoticness of being an incarnated human in its full destabilizing character, and still not be destabilized in the meditation, and to still be firmly held in the meditation from this infinite.
Yeah. Well, in a way, you're describing in that in it almost in a mathematical expression what takes place when the I moves from the point to that periphery, and you experience that vastness of consciousness. And yet it started with a concentration of point, and then your consciousness is beyond everything, an infinite consciousness, or as much as you can speak those words. And that's an extraordinary, isn't that extraordinary that it is expressed in this mystery of what I would call connected to the mystery of number. Now, I know you're talking about projective geometry, but it belongs under that mystery school in a certain sense. And I think that each of those various mystery schools, as we penetrate in them, they give the whole path, but from their language.
Mm-hmm.
And you could find, I think, that in what you're discovering in this point plane experience, that you could find the language of the transformative meditative experiences. Now, Steiner does give certain exercises around that. And there are certainly, often when people get to that point in their meditation where they've extinguished their verse or their symbol, whatever they're working with, and they're just in that emptiness with activity, they often find themselves in that sort of room of consciousness. There's no content, they're very aware, but they can't get rid of that kind of what feels like a boundary of the walls. They stay in themselves. And then that exercise where the point goes into the periphery can actually be the exercise that steps them out of that boundary, where they're just in that nothingness, pure consciousness, but do not know what vastness is.
Mm.
So there's many different aspects to the meditative experience, and accordingly exercises will lead us to certain experiences, but then we may also need to go beyond that experience once we're not comfortable is not the right word, but once we're capable there.
Mm.
So once someone's very capable in that place of activity without content, but there is nothing entering in, there's no shift in the expandedness of the consciousness, then that point periphery exercise can be what helps to drop those walls in the inner space and experience this other shift. And when your own being goes through that, it's a total shift of sense of self, because that point self, which is not your personality and all the story of self, but that point consciousness becomes then this expanded vastness of consciousness. And you understand why someone may think this is God consciousness. And then, but to get that shift, one has to first consolidate the point.
Mm.
And the personality is not a point. The personality is this raggedy chaos of many scripts running at the same time. That consolidating the point is the necessity before the vastness. That's very interesting. Yeah, I would really like to explore those things more.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, we talked about that with the virtues yesterday. Like, would each virtue have, in a way, a geometrical form? Could we understand it in that way? I mean, certainly, I'm sure someone in that stream Because I'm sure you're like myself. When you look at nature, you're seeing it through the eyes of projective geometry, and I look at it and I'm seeing it through the eyes of relationship to consciousness and meditate. Because we do that. When you're in a task, everything sort of wakes up in that task. And it's like, wow, that's extraordinary. And I think part of the mystery school is interesting because in the mystery centres you have different people playing the roles, carrying different tasks in the mystery centre. Now, how would we bring that together in the new mystery centre? How would someone that's truly in their task meet someone else that's truly in their task and then actually say, how does that, what being lives between those two that seems so different? Projective geometry and meditation. But you're already asking that question.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you feel like you really have your task? Is it really speaking that deeply?
I still feel like there are a couple of different tasks that are hovering around. So I feel like, so projective geometry as a task for me is something that's very new, because I was studying math as a graduate student, and I first came here for a conference totally unrelated to projective geometry, and started thinking about and basically decided as soon as the opportunity presented itself a year and a half ago that I wanted to come here. But then I was kind of back and forth about whether or not I wanted to, and it's like something that I've been was really afraid to do on many levels, and I finally have, now that I'm here, I finally really strongly feel like this is the right place to be. But just, in the sense that it's really a bold thing to do, to go and have like the central focus of my life being working in my career, to be working in a spiritual capacity, a school of spiritual science. And there are a lot of family members or friends or potential people that I could go on a date with, or where saying that I work at a school of spiritual science, it's like, as opposed to the path I was on before, it's like, oh, you're a graduate student at UNC. Oh, cool. Like, okay, that's, oh wow, you're someone special, or like, okay, and like oh wow, you have I can tell them these things that'll wow them. Like, oh yeah, I have a talk that I gave at Cambridge. You can look on the internet and whatever. And it's like, people are like, oh yeah, like you're so smart and all this stuff. And so I was really, really afraid to lose that. Or not, I didn't think like, but just viscerally, I was really afraid of the prospect of knowing that I was going to lose that. And I had a lot of opportunity. My advisor is a fairly well-known person, and he helped me get onto a track of research and helped me to find a question that was really interesting to a lot of people, and I made a lot of progress on it. And there were all these opportunities, and so I met all these people actually when I was at Cambridge, when I gave the talk, and I met all these people who were very interested in my research, and there were like a lot of opportunities. So it was kind of nagging me the whole time, like, do I really want to do this projective geometry thing? So I guess I didn't really think, I had kept telling myself, yes, I want to do this. I want to work with anthroposophy and work on something spiritual because that's more impactful. This other stuff I'm doing, it's theoretical, but it's also kind of physics, theory, fluid dynamics. So it's like, okay, it's theoretical. There's a good chance it won't have any impact on the world. But if it does have an impact on the world, it's just going to be, helping the U.S. Navy to make like a better bomb underwater or something like that. or to make a better, probably more realistically, like something in their engines that could be with fuel or who knows what. I'm not an engineer and I don't even know. It's just something like, would be something incremental that would probably help in some military application. So I just knew that doing something relating to spiritual science would be more impactful and more important. And so I managed to hold myself on that path despite a lot of fear and apprehension and second thoughts, and kind of dabbling with talking to people about doing a postdoc at Tulane or Northumbria University or these various places. But so it was only fairly recently after I had a transition period where I was staying in, I was staying with different family members. I was in Chicago, I was in California, I was in Oregon, but I was mostly in Chicago and Wisconsin, and so that was when I started really reading up on projective geometry. And actually, I mean, I've kind of gradually moved into it, because I was in Milan in September, and that's when I visited Oliver, and when I first began to really internalize the most basic things like the projective duality and the point to infinity. And so I guess I've only really taken on projective geometry in the last couple of months, and I've been trying to immerse myself in it as intensively as possible. And so it is really coming together as like a task that that's presented itself as something that I'm really meant to be working on right now. But there is this other task which kind of keeps presenting itself to me. It keeps this other task that has been coming at me from many directions, and many friends of mine have spontaneously, and people that I've talked to and felt a strong connection with, keep bringing up this machine learning thing. And it seems to me that maybe there needs to be some illumination about what's going on in machine learning that's really from the inside, that people who can dig in on a technical level, but also bring some spiritual illumination and some human illumination that can be shared with people as a whole, common people as well as researchers in these fields, and in the mainstream of these fields, or in the industry, and people in Silicon Valley, that can be shared with people to help them understand what is living in these, or isn't living, what's working in these technologies, because they're kind of a characteristic of them is how powerful they are, without having to understand how they're working. And I think, so that's another task that's presented itself that I don't know. Yeah. And it seems like, and then the OpenAI thing reached the mainstream recently and has become a really hot topic of conversation. So that's kind of brought it even more up. It's like, this is a really relevant question right now. So that's like a task that is presenting itself, that, now I'm here and I'm doing projective geometry, and I definitely feel like projective geometry is the task of the moment. But I also feel like there are these other things that are kind of, especially that machine learning thing, which is kind of floating as a question that's presenting itself as something that could be that could be something that I am meant to take up at some point. And it's also I got a book on it like a couple of years ago that I've always kept on the top of my desk. I've kept it by the side of my bed. I've taken it with me when I go on trips, and I haven't even opened it. And
so it may be a future task.
Yeah.
But this idea of multitasking, I don't think means I think it actually means that these days human beings actually can come in with more than one task, a true task. And it's really this staying with how that unfolds, and not this idea that I'm just going to find my calling and my one thing necessarily. And I think the younger people are getting more of that as an experience. So there is, I think, a deep spiritual picture of multitasking that is not about the superficiality of it. And you may well have a few things to bring into being here. But it's the important sense is, are you where you need to be right now? Because if you are there where you need to be right now, the next thing will unfold. And if you feel that rightness in this, then it's wonderful, isn't it? It's wonderful to be where you know you need to be. You don't need to know the whole picture. You just need to know that where you are now is the right place you need to be.
Walking home this way, I see there is still a light in me. Carry onward thankfully, and let the light see what it sees.